What's up, everyone, and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you're new here, then hello. My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting and diving into the Twisted series by Ana Huang. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. So I know that this series is not based on Greek mythology. Today I'm really here because there are a few subtle notes to Greek mythology that I just thought, since I've read the books, I might as well make a video on them. Now, if you don't know what the Twisted series is, the Twisted series has sold multi-millions of copies around the world. It is a new adult romance series that encompasses 4 different books, which are Twisted Love, Twisted Games, Twisted Hate, and Twisted Lies. And these books are all technically standalones, though I would recommend reading them in order. And they are just a romance series that are following the 4 members of this girl friendship group. That was like a really awkward way of saying that. But there are 4 women who are friends, and each book is dedicated to one of them finding love, essentially. So the first one, Twisted Love, is Ava falling in love with her brother's best friend, Alex. That is very dark, much more leaning into, I would say, mafia kind of romance, but really not mafia romance at the same time, but much more leaning into that, quite violent, that sort of a thing. Then book 2, which is Twisted Games, which is the book sitting behind me, follows Bridget, who is actually a princess who's soon to become queen of a made-up country, don't worry. And she falls in love with her bodyguard called Reese. Book 3 is Twisted Hate, and that book follows Jules, who is Ava's best friend, and Ava's brother, who's Josh, and looks at their love story and how they go from being absolute enemies to being lovers. And then we have the last book, which is Twisted Lies, which follows the last girl of this friendship group, well, woman, because at the time of that book, I think she's about 26. In the first book, Ava's 22, and I think in the last book, if I'm not mistaken, Stella's 26. But it follows Stella's romance with Christian Harper, who is Reese, so the guy in this book, his old boss, and it follows their relationship. So that's what the series is, okay? We're not going to be doing like a full-on book review here because I assume that the people who have clicked on this video have read the series. So if you haven't read the series, then do look down into the description below because I've added a bunch of information down there, links to the books, all of that kind of stuff. So why don't we just dive into book 1, Twisted Love, and I will tell you the one Greek mythology nod that I spotted in there. So if you turn to page 129, if you go about halfway through the page, it reads, "She was what I imagined Aphrodite would look like, had she been a real person." So this is Ava describing Madeline. Madeline is the previous hookup of Alex, and she ends up cornering Ava at a party. And Ava describes her as looking like Aphrodite. So who is Aphrodite? Aphrodite was a very important goddess in the ancient Greek world. She was an Olympian goddess and specifically was ruling over the areas of love, beauty, pleasure, sex, that kind of stuff, right? So she was always depicted as being incredibly beautiful, and oftentimes nude. Not always nude, because obviously you can't say that this is the only way she's depicted, but she's oftentimes nude. So when we see a nude goddess, that's really obvious that it's going to be Aphrodite. However, there are lots of attributes and symbols that are dedicated and specifically used for Aphrodite. So if we do see a clothed version of Aphrodite, she's normally either surrounded by any of these things, holding these items or these attributes so that we can identify her. So for example, Aphrodite is associated with doves, apples, scallop shells, mirrors. So on the rare occasion, again, that we see her clothed, these things will be around her. Now, Aphrodite, I think my favorite depiction of her, because there are so many different myths in Greek mythology that do have Aphrodite playing a part. But I think probably overall, my favorite depiction of her is in Homer's Iliad. I think she's so fun in Homer's Iliad because we get a really good scope of her character. We see her being absolutely brutal. We see her being funny. We see her being I don't want to say a bit of a wimp, but like the second she gets stabbed on the battlefield, she's like, oh my God, I can't go on. And speaking of which, we see her as a war goddess, because in some areas of Greece, she was actually worshipped as a war goddess, which is really, really interesting. And we also get a myth of her, a very small myth of her and her affair with Ares in the Odyssey, in case you guys want to go and check that out. But this, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because in lots of romance books, people and women in particular will be described as being as beautiful as Aphrodite, or like, you know, some sort of statue of her is oftentimes referenced to really show the reader how beautiful this person is, or how we should be picturing this person. So even though, yes, this does apply to Twisted Love, it also applies to many, many different romance books that we're still using the imagery, we're still using the word, we're still using that association of Aphrodite to show people, even in the modern world and even in modern writing, how beautiful people can be. With all that being said, we should move into book 3, which is Twisted Hate. And the reason is because actually I do think that there is something in Twisted Games, but I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. Right before recording, when I was cultivating all of my notes and putting them all together, I'm certain there is a note of Cerberus in this book, but I didn't highlight it. And as I was going through it, I couldn't find it either. So if I find it as I'm editing this video, I will include it. Either I'll like pause it now and I'll talk about it, or I'll include it in a pinned comment, the description below, if I find it. If not, I'm pretty sure it's in there, but either way, Twisted Hate is book number 3, and there is absolutely a reference to the ancient world, but I'm sure that this wasn't intentional. So if you guys turn to page 166, all the way at the bottom of the page, it reads, I tried to ignore the persistent buzz beneath my skin as Alex, Ava, Stella, and I entered Hyacinth, a hot new club on 14th Street. So this is when Jules and her friends are going out for drinks, because Jules is the main girl in this book. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is because, yes, Hyacinth is obviously the name of a flower, but a lot of people don't know that the name for that flower comes from Greek mythology. And obviously the name for the flower is now being used for a club. So let me tell you what this myth is. Hyacinth was a very, very handsome young man in ancient Greece. He is a Spartan prince, or was a Spartan prince, and he was loved in particular by 2 different gods. The first being Apollo and the second being Zephyrus. If you don't know who Zephyrus is the god of the west wind, because in Greek mythology, all the winds from different directions have names. That sounds really complicated and people are always like, I'm sorry, what? But I swear, once you actually get into Greek mythology and you get used to all the names, it's very easy, because not all of the gods, like the wind gods, come up all the time. It's really Boreas and Zephyrus. This is totally off topic. Let me get back to the myth. So Zephyrus, the god of the west wind, he starts to get jealous because Apollo and Hyacinth start having a really good thing going. And so one day when Apollo and Hyacinth are out and they are playing discus, Zephyrus gets involved, he pushes the discus off course, and the discus slams into Hyacinth's head and kills him, unfortunately. Now, Apollo grieves, and he is so utterly heartbroken over this youth that he transforms the dying man into a flower, which is the hyacinth. So it is a really tragic myth. It's a really tragic love story. It's really sad. However, that is how the flower got its name, that it's because Hyacinth continues to grow because Apollo couldn't let him go, which is so heartbreaking. And obviously, like I said, I don't think that was an intentional nod in Twisted Hate, and I don't want people to think that I think that was an intentional nod. I just thought it was an interesting thing to include because it is a nice subtle mention in book 3. Because when we get to book 4, when we get to Twisted Lies, we have 2 more obvious and very direct links to Greek mythology. The first one is on page 326, and this is from Christian's perspective. So Christian, at this point in the book, he's looking over the Mirage's security system, the Mirage being the building that he owns, and he and his team are currently looking into figuring out who Stella's stalker is. And he says, I developed Scylla 2 years ago. Named after the legendary Greek monster who devoured men off ships that sailed too close, the device didn't require a download or a USB port to hack into a system. So Christian, being the head of a security company and obviously owning the Mirage, he is trying to look into all these systems where, if you guys remember, there is an instance of the Stalker getting into the building, into the Mirage, but that part of the security footage has been corrupted. So when he names this other program after Scylla, and so rightly points out why he's named it after Scylla, let's just talk about who Scylla was in Greek myth. Scylla, or Scylla, really you can pick either way of pronouncing that, was a sea monster who lived in the rocks of a narrow strait opposite a whirlpool which is called Charybdis. Now, this is really specifically mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus and his men have to sail through the two, but they can't go too close to Charybdis or else they risk being swallowed by the whirlpool, and they cannot go too close to Scylla because Scylla, or Scylla, is a horrifying monster that, as is mentioned in Twisted Lies, will devour your men. The reason being is because, according to Homer, Scylla is a terrifying creature that has 12 feet, 6 long necks with these horrible heads on top of them, and they are lined with rows and rows of very, very sharp teeth. And not only that, but Scylla is also then described as having a voice like, I should really say a bark, like a dog. So she is an absolutely terrifyingly ginormous monster on the side of the rocks that you do not want to get close to. And Odysseus does get close to Scylla, and it goes exactly how you expect it would. But enough about Scylla, because I could do a whole episode just on her. She's a really fascinating monster, and so is Charybdis on the other side if we really look into the imagery used and the language used. However, we'll be here all day, and so we should go into the second quote from Twisted Lies, which comes to us on page 335, and it reads, again from Christian's perspective, "She looked like Venus emerging from the deep blue sea, only 1,000 times more spectacular." So Christian is saying this to describe Stella as she is emerging from the water. Now, he's gone to the island where she's been shooting the Delamonte shoot. He appears there, and when she is walking out of the water, he is just gobsmacked, clearly, by her beauty. Now, for those of you who don't know, Venus is actually the Roman name for the Greek goddess Aphrodite. So on that front, I don't have that much to explain. But I loved this image being evoked. I loved how specific it was, because this image of Stella coming out of the water being related to Venus reminds us of Venus or Aphrodite's birthing mythology. That sounds really weird, but the way that she was born in Greek myth, there are actually two different versions, two different lineages that you could follow depending on what author, and different ancient authors will go with different ones. However, the most famous one, and this is going to sound so weird to those of you that are not into Greek myth, Venus or Aphrodite in one version was born from the severed genitals of Uranus. Now, this happens after Zeus has severed them. He cuts them off and he throws them into the sea. When he throws them into the sea, there's some sort of like sea foam bubbling thing that happens. I don't know the science behind it, but that's what's described. Out pops a shell, and in the shell is Aphrodite or Venus, and she emerges nude from the sea. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention this is not only for the myth, but also because there is an incredibly famous Botticelli painting of the birth of Venus, which dates to like the 1480s-ish, if I'm getting this correct. But this is an incredibly famous image, and it really shows us in that moment of the book exactly how Christian Harper sees Stella. And to the credit of the author, Stella is topless then, because she is doing like a bikini shoot and all this. So she is topless in that moment. And I really loved the way that this image was really tied into the story. And it really gives us a window into what Christian is seeing in such a beautiful and elegantly put way. So I really appreciated and loved that. Now, those are the only notes, aside from possibly the Cerberus note in Twisted Games, that I have from this series. So as you can see, like I said, it is not based in Greek mythology. It is not based in history. It is not based in the ancient world whatsoever. But it is always fun to highlight these things and to really show you guys how everywhere you turn, there are little things relating to the ancient world. And I know that I sound like the dad from My Big Fat Greek Wedding a lot of the time when I say that, and how he's like, give me any word and I can relate it to Greek. I definitely sound like that with Greek mythology, but hopefully you guys can actually see the more we go into modern books, the more subtle nods appear to the ancient world absolutely everywhere. But that's all I have to say about this series. If you have any other thoughts, then do leave them in the comments below. I would love to get chit-chatting to you guys. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.